Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the familiar grows strange and the gentle shimmer of magic hides what should never be seen. Tonight, we step once more into the story of Cinderella, the girl of cinders, grace and glass. But listen closely, for even the most beautiful tale leaves soot behind. They called her Cinderella as a cruelty, a jest that clung like the ashes staining her skin. Her real name had been forgotten long ago, buried beneath years of chores and quiet humiliations. The soot was not only on her face, it had settled in her bones, in her breath. The manor had once been bright, alive with laughter and the scent of flowers her mother used to hang from the rafters to dry. But her mother had died, and her father, so eager to fill the hollow she left behind, had remarried. The woman he chose had eyes like a mirror's edge, and 2 daughters who learned quickly how to wound without drawing blood. When her father died, the house itself seemed to change. Rooms, once warm, grew cold. The clock in the hallway stopped chiming altogether, and somewhere between the chores and the silence, Cinderella stopped speaking to anyone at all. She swept, scrubbed, polished. Her fingers cracked and bled. Her hair turned brittle from the smoke. She was told she should be grateful to have shelter, that girls without mothers were lucky to have a roof, even if they slept by the hearth. She learned to move quietly. That was the key. A dropped spoon earned a sneer, a misstep, a slap, so she learned to make herself invisible, her footsteps softer than ash. Yet at night, when the fire had burned low, she would watch the coals. They shifted and breathed like tiny hearts, pulsing faintly. Sometimes she thought she heard them whisper, not words exactly, but something close, a sigh, a promise. The seasons turned. The stepsisters bloomed like roses fed on cruelty. One was vain, the other petty, and both believed themselves destined for greatness. Their mother nurtured that belief the way one tends a flame, with constant attention and just enough air to make it roar. Cinderella stayed small in her corner, her hands blistered, her back aching. But she watched. She always watched. There was something quiet and steady in her gaze, like someone memorizing the cracks in a mask. When the prince's ball was announced, the manor erupted in frenzy. Dresses were fetched, jewellery dusted off, tempers flared. The stepmother made a great show of pity. "Oh dear, you have nothing to wear," she said, looking down her nose at Cinderella's tattered gown. "And even if you did, who would notice you among so many?" The sisters laughed, bright, brittle laughter, like glass about to break. Cinderella smiled softly and bowed her head. "Of course, I'll help you prepare." That night, she brushed their hair until her arms ached, mended torn hems, and polished their shoes until she could see her own reflection in them, distorted, warped by the curve of the leather. When they left for the ball, the sound of the carriage wheels fading into the distance felt like silence swallowing her whole. She sat by the hearth again. The ashes were still warm. That was when she heard it, a sound like a sigh. The fire stirred, though no wind touched it. Embers rose in the air like red stars, and from the dark corner of the room came a figure, not shining, not kind, but shimmering faintly as though made of candlelight, glimpsed through smoke. "My poor child," the figure said, in a voice like the crackle of burning wood. "You've been forgotten long enough." Cinderella did not flinch. She had seen too much to fear a voice. "Who are you?" "Something your mother wished for you," it said. "A promise," she whispered before her final breath. "I've been waiting until you were ready." "Ready for what?" The figure smiled. "Too many teeth for such a soft face. For the world to see you as you truly are." The air shimmered. The cinders on the floor swirled up around her like a storm, clinging to her rags, melting into fabric that glowed faintly gold. Her hair coiled into shimmering braids, and on her feet, where soot had always clung, appeared slippers made of glass so clear it caught every flicker of the fire and turned it to light. When she lifted her foot, the slipper seemed to hum, a faint sound, like breath caught in a bottle. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're yours," said the figure. "But remember, my dear, beauty always knows what it's owed." Cinderella didn't understand. Not then. The ball was everything she'd never imagined, and somehow exactly as she'd dreamed. The chandeliers glowed like constellations. The guests turned as she entered, 100 whispers breaking like waves. The prince, young, golden, bored, looked up and froze as though he'd seen something divine. He asked her name. She smiled. The sound that escaped her lips wasn't quite her voice. They danced, and as she moved, the slippers whispered across the floor. People said later that she didn't seem to walk at all. She seemed to glide like smoke. Each step left behind the faintest trace, like frost on marble. At midnight, the clock began to strike, and the sound of it cut through the enchantment like a blade. The slippers burned suddenly, not painfully, but insistently, reminding her that they were not hers to keep. She fled, the gown unravelling into mist, the light dimming, the world shrinking back to its shape. One slipper slipped free and clattered down the stairs. The prince found it, holding it as though it were a holy relic. When she returned home, the embers in the fireplace were still warm. She stared at the remaining slipper on her foot. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw something inside the glass. A ripple, as if something were breathing in there. Days passed. The prince's men came with the slipper, testing it on every maiden in the kingdom. The stepsisters were ecstatic. One bruised her heel, forcing her foot in. The other cut her toe. Still, the slipper rejected them both. It seemed almost to recoil. When they reached Cinderella, the stepmother scoffed. "She's not even worth the time." But the guard insisted. Cinderella sat quietly, her eyes calm, her hands folded in her lap, When she slid her foot into the glass slipper, it fit as though it had been waiting. The glass warmed, glowed faintly, and a small sigh escaped it, like a breath finally released. Everyone gasped. The wedding came swiftly after. The kingdom rejoiced. The poor girl of ashes had become a princess. Songs were sung, flowers scattered, bells rung. Cinderella smiled through it all. She spoke with perfect grace, thanked her step-family for attending, even kissed their cheeks. But that night, when she removed her slippers and placed them beside the bed, she noticed something odd. They weren't entirely clear anymore. A faint smokiness clouded the glass, not enough for anyone else to see, but she did, and when she touched one, she felt the faintest pulse beneath her fingers. It beat once, twice, then stilled. She didn't sleep that night. In the quiet dark, she could hear them, the slippers, whispering faintly, a sound like breath against a window pane. They said only one thing, again and again, so soft it might have been imagined. It's time. The kingdom adored her. She was the perfect princess, gentle, charitable, smiling. In every portrait, people said she had forgiven her stepmother and sisters, and that her kindness was proof that purity endured even after suffering. The story of her mercy spread like perfume. It was repeated in sermons, written into songs, and so when Cinderella announced that she had invited her stepfamily to live in the palace, no one dared to question her. It was, after all, the mark of a true heart. They arrived in spring. The stepmother stepped from the carriage with practiced grace, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her skirts. Her daughters followed, their faces bright with fear and awe. Cinderella greeted them warmly, her voice honeyed. "You are family," she said, "and family should never be divided by bitterness." The stepmother looked as though she might fall to her knees. "We wronged you terribly, my dear." Cinderella smiled. "We all do what we must to survive." The palace seemed to welcome them at first. Rooms were prepared, servants assigned, meals shared in the great hall. Cinderella's husband, the prince, found the arrangement odd. He had never met a woman so forgiving, but she explained it all with that same serene smile. "Forgiveness is freedom," she told him. "It is a release." He kissed her forehead and told her she was good, but sometimes, in the candlelight, he thought her eyes looked distant, as if she were watching something no one else could see. At dinner, she would watch her stepfamily eat. She never ate much herself. Her stepmother, nervous, tried to make polite conversation. "The palace is very different from home," she said one night. "The halls are so quiet." "Quiet can be peaceful," Cinderella replied. Her voice was soft, but something in it made the older woman's stomach twist. That night, when the stepmother returned to her chambers, she noticed soot on her pillow, a faint grey smear in the shape of a footstep. She asked a maid to clean it. The maid looked at her strangely, I don't see anything, my lady. Days passed. The youngest stepsister, Flora, grew restless. It's like being in a church, she complained. No laughter, no life, only the sound of our own hearts. Her older sister, Coraline, hushed her. Don't speak that way. She's giving us another chance. But have you looked at her? Flora whispered. Really looked? Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. Coraline rolled hers. You always imagine things. That night, Flora woke to a sound, a faint tapping, rhythmic, soft, deliberate. She sat up and saw a shadow by her door, a figure standing still. Hello? No answer. The tapping stopped. In the silence, she heard another sound, the faint sigh of glass sliding against stone. When she opened the door, the corridor was empty, but there were footprints, faint, dusty imprints, blackened at the heel. They led towards Cinderella's wing. In the morning, she said nothing. She told herself it had been a dream, but she started to notice small things. Soot smudged on her gloves, her reflection in mirrors lagging a half-second behind. When she looked at the princess across the breakfast table, she thought she saw something dark flicker behind those perfect blue eyes, a reflection that wasn't her own. One evening, the prince found his wife standing alone in the great hall, staring down at her slipper. It was darker than before, not opaque yet, but clouded. A faint shadow rippled within it, like smoke trapped in crystal. Is something wrong, my love? He asked. Cinderella looked up slowly. No, she said, just thinking. He followed her gaze to the slipper. It's changing colour. Should we call the jeweller? She smiled faintly. No, it's meant to. That week, Flora fell ill. The doctors could find no cause. She slept fitfully, muttering about footsteps in the dark and cold breath on her neck. One night, she woke screaming. When her sister and mother rushed in, she pointed to the corner of the room. She was here. Who? The stepmother asked, clutching her. The princess, Flora gasped. She was standing there, but her eyes... She broke off, shuddering. Cinderella entered a moment later, drawn by the commotion. What's happening? The girl froze, staring at her. Then she fainted. Cinderella knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. Poor thing, she murmured. The fever is cruel. The stepmother wanted to object, to ask where she had been just moments ago, but the words wouldn't come. Cinderella's presence was calming, her tone so gentle. It was disarming. Flora's illness deepened. She began to speak less, to eat less. Cinderella visited her daily. She brought cool cloths, whispered prayers, read stories by the window. When the girl died, it was quiet, a sigh, a stillness. Everyone said how merciful Cinderella was, to have cared for her so lovingly. That night, the slipper turned darker still. It wasn't grey anymore. It was smoky, veined faintly like black marble. The prince noticed, frowning. Strange, he said. Cinderella smiled. Everything changes in time. The palace grew colder. The stepmother and remaining daughter grew wary of every creak and whisper. The servants avoided the east wing altogether. Coraline began to dream of ash falling like snow, covering her bed, her hands, her tongue. In her dream, she tried to brush it away, but the ash clung, filling her mouth until she couldn't breathe. She woke choking and saw a figure in the corner of her room. It wasn't entirely dark, that figure. The light of the moon caught on something glass-like. When she blinked, it was gone. Cinderella's demeanour never changed. She tended the gardens, hosted dinners, smiled for the court painters. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were mild, perfect. The prince began to sense something strange beneath it all. A tension, like music played too softly to be heard, but always present. One evening, he found her sitting at the fire again, staring into the flames the way she must have done years ago. "Do you miss them?" he asked gently. "Your family, before all this?" She tilted her head. "Miss them? Yes. The ones who hurt you. You forgave them, didn't you?" Her smile was small. "Of course. I gave them everything they wanted. Isn't that forgiveness?" Coraline vanished soon after. Her mother searched the palace, demanding the guards comb every hall. Cinderella helped, her face pale with concern. "Perhaps she went walking by the lake," she suggested, but when they searched the lakeside, they found only a single shoe. Not glass, but silk, half sunk in the mud, smeared with soot. The slipper that Cinderella wore that night was nearly black now. The prince stared at it while she slept, the faint rise and fall of her breath, casting shifting shadows over its surface. It seemed to move very slightly, like something inside it was restless. The stepmother no longer slept. She heard whispers in the walls, faint footsteps, pacing the halls at night. One evening, she found the courage to confront Cinderella. She entered the princess's chambers without knocking. Cinderella stood before the mirror, brushing her hair. The slipper gleamed darkly at her feet. "You've done something," the stepmother said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what, but you've cursed this place." Cinderella met her gaze in the mirror. "Why would I curse my own home?" "Because you hate us," the woman hissed. The brush paused. "Hate? Yes. You're punishing us for what we did. Admit it." Cinderella turned then, her eyes calm. "I don't hate you." "Liar!" "I don't need to hate you," she said softly. "I forgave you. Isn't that what everyone says a good woman should do?" The stepmother took a step back. "You're not good." Cinderella smiled. "No, just thorough." The older woman fled the room. Behind her, Cinderella set the brush down gently and looked at the slippers. They pulsed once, faintly. The black had deepened. Only a few streaks of clarity remained, like veins of light in stone. The next morning, the stepmother was gone. Her bed was untouched, her window open. The servants whispered that she must have fled in the night. Others said she had been taken by grief. The prince wanted to believe either of those things, anything but the truth his mind was beginning to form, because when he entered his wife's room that morning, he saw the slippers. They were no longer clear, they were black as coal, and as she walked toward him, he saw that every step she took left a faint, dark footprint, as though soot clung to her heels. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Cinderella smiled, serene. "Perfectly." The air smelled faintly of smoke. That night, the prince dreamed of the hearth in their chamber. He dreamed it was whispering to him, a woman's voice, warm and low. It said, "She only gives back what was given to her." He woke in a sweat, his wife sleeping peacefully beside him, her slippers gleaming darkly by the firelight. The palace had grown quiet. It wasn't the kind of quiet that spoke of peace, but of stillness. The hush of rooms holding their breath, waiting. The corridors smelled faintly of smoke, the faint scent of ashes lingering in the tapestries, the silk, the very air itself. The prince had noticed it, at first in small ways, a shadow where none should be, a faint smudge on a polished floor, whispers just beyond understanding. He had tried to dismiss it, told himself it was fatigue, a product of worry over recent court matters. But the slippers, it was the slippers that had drawn his attention most insistently. Once crystal clear, they had grown darker with every passing day, each hue of black more intense, more defined, until they resembled molten glass, veins of soot crisscrossing the surface. And with each step Cinderella took, faint smudges, black footprints, traced her path across the polished floors. He tried to speak with her about it, softly, carefully. "My love, the slippers, they're changing, and there are marks where you walk." She had looked at him, serene, her blue eyes unreadable. "They are only shadows of what was," she said lightly. Nothing more. The prince wanted to believe her. He wanted to tell himself that it was mere superstition, a trick of the mind, but deep down he could feel the pull of unease, an unrelenting weight pressing into his chest whenever he looked at her, the slippers, the trails of soot she left behind. The final stepmother and her surviving daughter, Coraline, were trembling constantly. They whispered behind closed doors, sharing glimpses of ash on their gowns, strange gusts of cold sweeping through hallways, fleeting shadows at the edges of their vision. "Have you noticed the footprints?" Coraline whispered one morning, her voice hushed, nearly breaking under her fear. Her mother shook her head, hands trembling. "No, you are imagining things." Coraline's eyes widened. "No, I'm not. I saw them. Black marks behind her, wherever she walks." Her mother's face went pale. "Nonsense. She is your sister-in-law now. She would not harm us. But deep down, both knew something had changed, and the blackening slippers, now fully opaque and almost glowing faintly with a smoky light, told the truth. One evening, the prince could no longer hold back. He followed Cinderella as she walked through the grand hall, her posture perfect, her gown flowing, the slippers leaving faintly smudged imprints in her wake. "Cinderella," he said, voice low and steady, though his heart raced. "Tell me the truth." She paused mid-step, looking down at him as though seeing him for the first time. "The truth of what?" "The slippers, the footprints, the women who are missing. Where are they?" Her smile was slow, deliberate, and it did not reach her eyes. "Ah," she said softly, "you have noticed." He stepped closer. "Yes, I've noticed, and I want to know, now, what this means." Cinderella's hands folded in front of her. "Very well," she said, her voice calm, almost tender. "Since you ask," the prince had never seen her like this. It was not the Cinderella he had danced with at the ball. It was not the gentle, forgiving girl who had smiled at him beside the hearth. It was a woman forged in patience, in ashes, in years of careful observation. A predator, disguised as a princess. "The women who hurt me," she said quietly, stepping closer so he could see the subtle gleam in her eyes. "They are no longer here because they do not deserve to be." He staggered back. You killed them." She shook her head. "Killed? Number, not in the way you mean." Her fingers traced the edge of the glass slipper, now black as soot. "I only gave them what they had given me. I gave them life in fragments. I allowed them to fade, to unravel, to be consumed by what they themselves created in me." He swallowed, his throat dry. You watched them suffer." Her lips curved. "They believed I had forgiven them. They believed they were welcome. They believed everything. And while they slept, while they ate, while they thought themselves safe, they began to break, slowly, quietly, perfectly." He looked down at the slippers. The black glass seemed to pulse, faintly, like a heartbeat beneath her feet. Every time she shifted her weight, the trails of soot deepened across the marble floors. You're insane," he whispered, stepping back, horrified. She tilted her head. "Perhaps, or perhaps I am simply thorough." The prince realized then the full horror of what had happened. Flora, gone. Coraline, gone. And their mother. She had vanished in the night, leaving only the faintest trace of soot leading from her bedchamber to the gardens. No one could explain it. No one would ever see them again. And all of it, he knew, had been orchestrated by the serene woman before him, the woman he had vowed to love, the woman whose hands remained clean, whose smile never wavered. You planned it all," he said, his voice trembling. "I did," she said simply. "I watched, I waited, I forgave, and now the debt is repaid." He stumbled back. How can you live with this?" Her smile widened. "Oh, I do not merely live with it." She lifted a foot, turning slowly, the black slippers gleaming in the firelight. "I am it. Every step I take carries their memory, their punishment, their ashes." He looked down at the footprints. Black, deep, perfect impressions on the marble floors. "And the slippers, they've changed." She nodded. "With each of them, each step they took, while thinking themselves safe, the glass absorbed them. And now, see, they are mine. They bear witness to my triumph." The prince felt bile rise in his throat. What will happen to me?" She crouched slightly, hands clasped neatly in front of her. "You are fortunate. You are still useful. But beware, even love is not a shield. Every heart holds a reckoning, and I will walk through this palace forever, leaving ashes in my wake." He realized then his love, his trust, everything he had held sacred was meaningless. The Cinderella he had known, the gentle girl of ashes and kindness, had been a mask all along. Beneath it had lain a patience so cold, so meticulous, that the kingdom itself could not escape her judgment. And she smiled, slowly, beautifully, and turned to walk past him. Every step left a black mark, a trail that could never be erased. The prince tried to follow her, to plead, to understand, but the slippers led her ever onward. He ran to the halls where the women had last been seen, but the rooms were empty. The palace, once bright and filled with laughter, seemed to exhale ash with every step. He returned to her side. "Cinderella, please, stop this. You've gone too far." She looked at him. "Too far? Number, I have only taken what was owed, and now I am whole." She lifted her gaze to the chandeliers, where crystal hung like frozen stars. "Every step I take will remind this castle of them. Every corner, every room, every mirror will whisper their absence. I am the other foot, the one who finally measures the world with justice, with care, with perfection." He sank to the floor, staring at the blackened slippers, the footprints, the calm and radiant woman who had orchestrated it all. "I loved you," he whispered, barely audible. She crouched down slightly, tilting her head. "And I kept you alive, witness to my art. You may yet survive if you remember who rules here. But remember this, forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is the finest cruelty of all." With that, she stood and walked down the grand hall, the black footprints trailing after her like smoke curling along the floor. The prince tried to follow, but the weight of understanding pressed too heavily on him. The palace felt alien, the air thick with the scent of ash and glass. He sank to the floor, watching her glide farther into the shadows, the sound of her heels faintly singing against marble. He would never see her the same way again. The girl who had danced into his life, the Cinderella of the ball, the golden girl of ashes, was gone. In her place walked the princess who measured the world in soot, who smiled with perfect grace while leaving ruin behind her, and the slippers, black and gleaming, held the story of every step she had taken, every step of vengeance, every step of justice, every step of the other foot. The castle slept uneasily that night. Servants whispered of shadows that moved independently, of soot that appeared where no foot had touched. The gardens were dusted with black powder that vanished in the morning sun. And somewhere in the palace, Cinderella stood at the window, looking out over her kingdom. The wind tugged at her gown. She traced the black slippers lightly with her fingers, and a faint smile curved her lips. Every step, every mark, every life taken in quiet justice, all of it a perfect symmetry, and the prince, kneeling behind her, could only watch